che hagin pensat a mi per parlar d'Estònia i il cas estonià. Però m'expresso millor in anglès, així que per més comoditat passo a començar la presentació in aquesta altra llengua.
That's great.
So, now I can relax. So, I'll begin, like Uldis did, speaking about the situation with Estonian in the socio-historical context. I've got here the map, including the future perspectives, but I think that the second half of the presentation will have to be for tomorrow because I have too much. But generally, to begin with, then I'll be speaking, like Uldis gave, an introduction to the language and to the country in general, a little bit about the Soviet period as well, and then I guess to finish with today, I'll be looking at an overview of the current situation and what the language policy is in Estonia. And then, as I say, I think more for tomorrow, I'll look more specifically at the ethnic makeup of the Estonian population, the identity features of the non-ethnic Estonians, look at specific areas of language use, and then see how that leads us into the future. So, as you're already aware, that Estonia is one of the three Baltic states in Northeast Europe on the Baltic Sea. The capital is Tallinn, which comes from the word for Danish castle or Danish city, Taanilin. Uldis has already spoken about a lot of these things, but the size of the country, about the same size as Denmark or the Netherlands, but every Estonian will tell you that, of course, it is bigger, only a little bit. Independent, I've put until 1939, the official year is 1940, but in 1939 the military bases were established. And since 2004, a member of the European Union and NATO. Again, Uldis has mentioned most of these things already. Estonian, and I will show you in a minute a few examples of the Estonian language, because I think it's important when we think about why are we even bothering to have these sort of conferences and these discussions, because there's something unique about different languages, and that's why I want to show you some examples of the Estonian language. So it's not, as in a Finno-Ugric language from the Uralic family, it's not genetically related to the Indo-European languages of Europe, such as Russian, Latvian, or English. And it's only one of three countries in the world that have a Finno-Ugric language as a national language, so Finnish and Hungarian being the other two. So this is a map of where the Finno-Ugric and Samoyedic languages exist, so that's the Uralic languages in general. So you can see Estonia is here. It also shows in Latvia here another language which is Livonian. I think the last native speaker died this year.
Oh,
okay.
Everyone argues over the numbers.
Okay, but basically an extinct language. But well, you can see they're Finnish, and quite unusually for language families like this, Hungarian. It's geographically very, very much separated from the others. But otherwise, the languages go all the way across into Siberia. And the belief is that they originated around the Ural Mountains. That's why they're called Uralic languages. So, Uldis has spoken about a lot of these things already, but until the 19th century there were no texts essentially in Estonian except for religious texts. The first newspaper was published in 1857, and it was the first mention of the word Eesti to describe the Estonian people or the Estonian language. Previously they were just people of the land or languages of the land, maarahvas or maakeel. And Eesti, even though it's a word to describe Estonia and Estonian, it's not an Estonian word. it's of German or Swedish origin. 1861 was the compilation of the first epic. Oh, sorry, the epic, the Estonian epic, compiled or composed, because it's not as authentic as some other epic stories where, you know, the story already existed, it was half invented. And then in 1906 it became the language of education. We can speak about national harmonization in 1914 because Standard Estonian is based on the major northern dialect, in other words, the one from Tallinn. And the reason for that is because the whole Bible was translated first into that dialect in 1739. The major southern dialect from Tartu got the first Bible, but it was only the New Testament. And so that's the reason often given as why the Tallinn dialect is now the Standard Estonian. During the first years of the years of the first independence, the standardization continued, the language was modernized. As Aldis already mentioned, the German spelling of Estonian was replaced with one based on Finnish, and a lot of German words were removed. Certainly a lot remained though, and they were replaced with international borrowings, in other words, words of Latin or Greek origin, a lot of Finnish words as well, and also some words were just completely invented, words that sounded Estonian. So here you can see a map of the present-day dialects in Estonia. It's a little bit misleading in the sense that the dialects don't really exist in a strong sense. The ones on the island, yes, because of the separation, and then really the only other dialect that is strong is the one down here in the southeastern corner, which I'll talk more about. So, as I mentioned, I want to talk a bit about features of the language itself. It is an agglutinative language, like Finnish and the other Finno-Greek languages, which means adding bits to the end in order to give more information, grammatical information, but it's moving away from that. It has 14 cases. Vowel-rich, so the vowel to consonant ratio is 45 to 55, so almost half-half. And it's a very unusual example, but I've given you an example here of a sentence with 3 words each having 4 vowels in a row. They're compound words though, so words don't normally exist with 4 vowels. So it's ku uriate. So the researchers of the moon, the work night, jäädä. So the moon researchers work evening on the edge of the ice. As I say, not a very, quite an unusual sentence. And then just to give you an example here of how the language is put together. So täppidega lipsud sobivad esinduslikele teatrijuhtidelegi. So, okay, no need to really go into the whole sentence, but you can see how the bits of information are added on the end. So the tap being dots, de meaning plural, ga with, lipsud, it's plural, ties, neckties. Sobivad, again, it's plural ending, and so on. As Aldis also mentioned, even though we can say genetically Estonian and Latvian are not related, there is this so-called sprachbund from the Baltic area where the languages have influenced each other, particularly Estonian and Latvian, because Estonia and Latvia were part of the German-run territory. There's been obviously influence from German into both languages, and Livonian is another part of that sprachbund. But as I mentioned before, Livonian is essentially an extinct language. But an interesting example is into Latvian, at least, that in Estonian and in Finnish as well, for example, you don't say I have you something, you say to me or on me there is something, mul on in Estonian, and that same construction has been borrowed into Latvian. man ir. So as I mentioned before, Estonian was sort of cleaned, a lot of German vocabulary was cleaned out of Estonian, but much of it has remained. And we can really only speak of about 50% of the words in Estonian being of Finno-Ugric origin. Most of the borrowed words are from German, as I said, but if we take out international loan words, the proportion of Finno-Ugric words increases to about 2/3. I'm not sure how well you can read that. It's just to give you an example of the variation within the dialects. I've put there in Castellano, I don't want to use the word Spanish, I'm sure you understand why, because I speak that language, and so just to give you an example of, to show you what it means. So the standard Estonian at the bottom. Now, the language which is the major dialect is this one here. It's normally spoken about as just one, Võru or Seto. And you can, if you can, hopefully see that it is actually quite different. And here's a further example. And as you can see, if you look at the third and fourth examples, the word for tail, saba, in standard Estonian, hand in Võru, häntä in Finnish. So you can see that there's even though Võru is further away from Finland than the north part of Estonia, that they've retained, in certain words at least, a stronger Finno-Ugric influence there, or not influence, but the basis of the language. Same with kask for birch tree, kõiv in Võru, and koivu in Finnish. And then ellei and eläin for animal. And then there's an example of a sentence at the bottom there of we could not have tea. We could not have a tea at the uncle's farm. Again, a quite strange sentence, but it's the one I got from the Võru Institute's website. And I think it'll be tomorrow when I get to talk about it, but it's important to be aware of the situation with the Võru language, because it does exist. It has its own language institute. It is taught in schools, but the attitude of the rest of Estonian, the rest of the Estonian people towards the language is not positive, and that's something that, as I say, I want to talk about later on. So again, all this has already gone through a lot of this area of the topic, but just to go over a few things more. I'm sure you'll recognize, well, as already mentioned, I did write a study about this, comparing the Catalonian case with